Life as I knew it was over. 7 years ago when Dad died, I had to jump into the caregiving role. It changed my life and my husband's life. Plans that we had for the future changed. We had to consider Mom and her needs at every turn. Grief was exhausting for me. I was always tired. I had to really muster up the energy to do much of anything for myself, never mind other people.
When we avoid grief, we can shut down. Grief is a journey. It's a lifelong journey, and it can last your whole entire life. It's not just something that you get through. You go over it, under it, around it, through it. You run from it, you hide from it, you come back to it. It ebbs and flows. It returns on anniversaries. It returns on Christmas. It returns.
It came with some huge heartache, heartbreak, sadness, despair. Sometimes I felt numb. Felt like I just couldn't continue or carry on. You feel lost.
My name is Lana Crawford. I am a palliative nurse, and I'm currently the resident and family liaison at Pilgrim's Hospice. When you're in a state of grief and loss, you're not your best self. That's the bottom line. And so the idea of moving forward in a productive way just sometimes is just not even, you can't even go there. I think when someone becomes a caregiver, they experience loss right from the very beginning. The first loss that they experience is the change of their role. Their life as they knew it is now over. They don't have the freedom, the independence, the ability to just do the things that they want to do and prioritize their own needs and their own care. They're now thinking about someone else. And that in itself is the first loss.
My name is Jill Burt. I'm a spiritual health practitioner at Pilgrim's Hospice Society in Edmonton, Alberta. One of the types of grief and loss that a caregiver can experience is what we call anticipatory grief. Anticipatory grief is that grief that you feel before a death occurs. And therefore, what happens is sometimes the caregiver doesn't really ask for help or even identify that they're experiencing this kind of grief.
I was so confused. I felt like I was stuck between my mother's life and death and just didn't know how to proceed. But with Alzheimer's, there's a whole other beast. The person is still in front of you physically, but they're gone psychologically or cognitively. And then they come back. Momentary pieces of lucidity, and Mom's back, and you've got that hope, oh, Mom's back, it's okay. No. And then she leaves again, and the heart breaks into further pieces.
I think the biggest loss that a caregiver goes through is losing themselves. They give so much away to everybody else that they don't give any care to themselves, and so they ultimately become invisible. They lose their time, they lose their dignity, they lose their independence, they lose their finances, they lose their life sometimes.
It's very difficult for the caregiver to hold that grief, knowing that death and end of life is probably going to be close. There are many things that a caregiver can do to support their loved one at the end of life in their environment.
Often caregivers can feel quite helpless, and there's also an element of guilt, and their loved one needs to go to a hospice or to a facility to be cared for. One way that I encourage families and friends to support their loved one in that new environment and to ease a little bit of that guilt that the caregiver can feel is to personalize their space as much as they can to bring comfort to the resident. And I try to get people to focus on their 5 senses. What feels good at home, what reminds them of home. So that might be their favorite blanket or their favorite pillow, the pillow that they really like. That's okay.
Artwork on the walls, family photos, the family pet, perhaps, that gets to come for a visit and a snuggle on the bed. friends or neighbors who, if it's appropriate for them to come in. And what happens is when we create that environment for our care recipient, as a caregiver, we also feel that comfort.
The advice that I would offer to caregivers when they're preparing for potentially the person that they love to die would be to get things in place and have the tough conversations. That when it is the time that it comes to our end of life, they're all nicely put together like a gift, because that's the most difficult thing for families to try and navigate when we're struggling with losing somebody potentially. There's a lot of feelings that come up when you're walking along someone when they're dying. It can be really scary, and you can be really, really angry and resentful about what's happening in your world. And it's okay to feel like that. And it's okay to talk about feeling like that. We don't have to pretend that we're okay. The best thing you can do when you're walking alongside somebody when they're dying is just simply be who you are. Grief's not the enemy. It's not an enemy at all. It doesn't even need to be looked at like it's a villain. Think about this. We have light and we have darkness. Neither one is good or bad. Neither one is right or wrong. And we can't see one without the other. We can't possibly see a flicker of light if we don't have the darkness. And we can't see the dark if we don't have light. So even though we experience death, dying, and grief, there's still joy in it, and there's still times of celebration, laughter, and ever so much honesty. It's a time to be really truthful with your feelings, and it's also a time to be gathering with each other and celebrating the ones that we loved. When we have support, and Caregivers Alberta does help. They have a wonderful grief program, and they offer the support so that we're not alone in that darkness where it's heavy and we're feeling like we're drowning.
After our care recipient dies, we often go through this stage where we just have a little bit of an identity crisis.
Now what? Now what do I do? What do I do with my time? I always try and encourage families to remember, and those caregivers to remember, is that take time. You don't have to figure it out in the first week after your loved one dies. Grieve the loss, be in that moment of sadness, and just give yourself grace and patience when it comes to figuring out now, again, your new norm. We recommend with a lot of our grief groups and grief programming that people wait 3 months after their loved one has died before they access one of our grief groups and programming, just because we find that in that 3-month time, things do settle a little bit, and you do need that time to get back to your day-to-day and figuring out what your priorities are and what that life should look like after that loss.
For me, learning about my mom's disease, it opened the door and helped me to find other people that are in a similar situation. The Alzheimer's Society of Alberta was instrumental in helping me understand what was going on, and also to start a support group in which people understood what I was going through. For the caregiving part, I found that the Caregivers of Alberta offer great supports. Individually, group support, information, it's all there. You just need to ask for help.
Grief is a journey. There's hope in it. There's growth in it. There's change. There's new beginnings. There's peeling back layers of who we were, who we got lost in the caregiver journey, and who we got lost in the grief. And we emerge this new being. And when we learn how to walk with that, then that's the beauty of grief.